This is Lecture 5, Part 2. Imagine it is an election year, and you want to know how many voters are going to vote for a specific candidate. You could theoretically ask every single voter what their vote intentions are, but that would be too difficult and too costly. Instead, you could ask a random sample of voters what their vote intentions are, and use the information from that sample to estimate candidates' vote share. So basically, we use results from a survey to make an estimate of how many voters will vote for a candidate from a sample of voters. Note that we do not make a point estimate or a specific estimate. For example, we wouldn't say a candidate would definitely get 52% of the vote. Instead, we estimate candidates' vote share percentage within a 95% confidence interval. In other words, we want to know what is their lowest possible vote share and what is their highest possible vote share. This is similar to calculating a confidence interval for a mean from a sample. The calculations are slightly different, but the intuition is the same. You do not need to know how to do that for this class, but you do need to know how to interpret the results of a survey. When you read the results of a survey, the results will tell you that a candidate will get a vote percentage plus or minus a margin of error. The margin of error tells us the lower and upper bounds of the confidence interval. To interpret this information, we say we have 95% confidence that the candidate will get anywhere between the percentage minus the margin of error and the percentage plus the margin of error. For example, imagine the results of a survey said that candidate A is going to get 51% plus or minus 3%, or 51% minus 3% to 51% plus 3%. Then imagine the survey also said that candidate B was going to get 49% plus or minus 3%, or 49% minus 3% to 49% plus 3%. We would say we have 95% confidence that candidate A will get anywhere between 48% of the vote and 54% of the vote. We also have 95% confidence that candidate B will get anywhere between 46% of the vote and 52% of the vote. Often in the news, reporters tend to focus on the percentages and not the margin of error. So here's an example based on this. Imagine the news headline said 51% of the voters will vote for candidate A and 49% of the voters will vote for candidate B. Candidate A is ahead. This is an incorrect interpretation. In one state of the world, candidate A could get 54% of the vote and candidate B can get 46% of the vote. In another state of the world, candidate B can get 52% of the vote and candidate A can get 48% of the vote. In other words, we can only confidently conclude that either candidate could win. It is a statistical tie. Neither is ahead. Consider this second example. Imagine the results of a survey said that candidate A is getting 60% of the vote plus or minus 3%, and candidate B is getting 40% of the vote plus or minus 3%. We can say we have 95% confidence that candidate A will get anywhere between 57% of the vote and 63% of the vote. And we can also say we have 95% confidence that candidate B will get anywhere between 37% of the vote and 43% of the vote. Candidate A's lowest possible vote share is 57%. The highest possible vote share for candidate B is only 43%. We can conclude with confidence that candidate A will likely win this election. If you are interested in analyzing poll results for U.S. elections, this website here, realclearpolitics.com, provides a summary list of the polls. When you go to the website, this is what it should look like. Note that what I'm showing you here are polls for the 2020 U.S. presidential election. The first column tells you the name of the poll. The second column tells you when the poll was taken. The third column tells you what the sample is composed of. Then you have the margin of error and the vote percentages for each candidate. And the spread just tells you the difference between the vote percentages for each candidate. In terms of the sample column here, you'll see two letters, LV or RV. So when pollsters poll voters, they don't want to poll everybody. They just want to poll people that they think are going to vote. So there's two ways you could figure out who's going to vote. You could just look at registered voters, because you need to be registered to vote. Or if you're savvy enough, you can come up with a way to predict within those registered voters who is likely to vote. In either instance, you want to make sure that the people that you're polling are representative of the people who are actually going to vote, because if they're not, your results are going to be biased. So for example, if you look at this first poll here, the IBD-TIPP poll, they're polling 1,021 likely voters, while the second poll here, the Harris-Hill X poll, they're polling 928 registered voters. So different samples could lead to different results. So I'm going to show you how to interpret these two polls here. So for the IBD-TIPP poll, like I said, there are 1,021 likely voters in the sample. And for the results for Trump, it's 46 plus or minus 3.5. And for Biden, it's 49 plus or minus 3.5. So we could say Trump could get anywhere between 42.5% of the vote to 49.5% of the vote, and Biden can get anywhere between 45.5% of the vote to 52.5% of the vote. So in one state of the world, Trump could get 49.5% of the vote, and Biden could get 45.5% of the vote. And in another state of the world, Biden could get 52.5% of the vote, and Trump could get 42.5% of the vote. In other words, we cannot confidently conclude from this poll that either candidate could win the popular vote. It may look like Biden's ahead, but it is technically a statistical tie. Neither is ahead. Now let's look at the second poll. They surveyed 928 registered voters. Biden got 47 plus or minus 3.2, and Trump got 40 plus or minus 3.2. So Trump gets anywhere between 36.8% of the vote to 43.2% of the vote, and Biden gets anywhere between 43.8% of the vote to 50.3% of the vote. Biden's lowest possible vote share is 43.8, but the highest possible vote share for Trump is 43.2. We can conclude with 95% confidence that Biden will win the popular vote. With all that being said, it's really hard to use polls and survey results to predict who's going to be the winner of a U.S. presidential election, because the winner of the U.S. presidential election is not the winner of the national popular vote. They are the winner of the Electoral College. There are 538 electors in the Electoral College, and a candidate needs 270 Electoral College votes to win the U.S. presidential election. So where do these electors come from? They come from states. So the number of electors per state equals the number of House of Representatives that state has plus the number of senators. So in Idaho, we have 2 House of Representatives members and 2 senators, so we get 4 electors. Whoever wins Idaho gets 4 electors in the Electoral College. In the Electoral College, the bigger your population, the more House of Representatives members you have. So states that are bigger have more Electoral College votes. But every single U.S. state has 2 senators. So this compensates smaller states. You can be a state like Idaho that's pretty small in terms of population, but still get these 2 senators. That means that smaller states are given a slight edge in the Electoral College. So ultimately, a candidate can win the Electoral College and not win the popular vote if they're slightly less popular in the big states, but a little bit more popular in the smaller states. In other words, National polls predict the popular vote winner, not the Electoral College winner. So, for example, in 2016, it was clear that Hillary Clinton was going to win the national vote, which is exactly what happened. She got about 66 million votes, while Donald Trump only got about 63 million. So she clearly was ahead in the national popular vote. But Donald Trump was pretty popular in some of these small states here. So that gave him a slight edge in the Electoral College, and he won the Electoral College vote. So when you're trying to predict who's going to win a presidential election, be very careful, because just because it looks like a candidate is ahead in the polls nationally does not mean they're going to win the presidential election.